All right. Welcome. Here, look, I can do this today. To Nicsmas in July, day 3. I'm a couple minutes early, so do me a favor if you are here or you're catching the replay. I did just take down the day 1 replay, and I will take down the day 2 replay shortly. Let me know that you're here. Just drop a comment, hit the thumbs up if you would like. Did not do any marketing or anything for Nicsmas in July, so the only way people are ever going to know we're here is a little bit of engagement. Obviously, no obligation. But since we're a little bit early, we've got a little bit of time, it would be appreciated. And I'll explain how this all works long term. I'll probably do that at a later date. I'll do like a day 4 wrap up at the end of the month, because we have something very cool coming at the end of the month that I'm really excited about. I don't know if you'll be excited about it, but if you like Nicsmas and the concepts and you want to see what it looks like in the real world, share it with you guys, because I don't like email, I don't like social media, I don't like Slack, I don't like any of that stuff. I don't like Discord, I don't like Telegram. Yes, I use them to communicate, but for the last 2 or 3 years, we've actually been working on a solution to those things. All right. Crypto Duke says, good morning, Wolf Den. This is not Wolf Den channel, but there's a lot of Wolf Den people here, so yes, good morning, Wolf Den. And thank you for letting me know the audio is good. We'll get started. Nicsmas in July, day 3, an extension of Dala, directions for acting like an adult, or don't act like an asshole. An explanation as to why people don't like and they rebel against and repel the best leaders, creating a doom loop of supporting and voting for the worst. If you remember yesterday and day 1, being an ethical leader is extremely difficult, because people on all sides are not going to like what you have to say, because they want something for nothing. They want dopamine. They want good news. This is how we are wired. Unfortunately, that used to be impossible, right? You think hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, you couldn't just sit around before there was television, before there were newspapers even. You couldn't just sit around and hope for good news. You had to go earn it. You had to go make it. You had to go, do your job in your tribe, in your village, so that you could eat. That was the good news. You got food today, which means there's a higher probability that you can procreate later on. Rinse and repeat. So just understand that we're not hardwired to live in a world of easy dopamine, but of course, capitalism, the capitalist pigs, which we all are on some level, have discovered that if they can just give you good news or say nice things or confirm your bias, then you will give them money and attention. A lot of times you don't realize you're giving them money. What you're doing is you're giving them eyeballs, and advertisers are giving them money in exchange for your eyeballs. So if there's free media, you are the product, and this is kind of explaining why and how to start to break the cycle if you just want things to get better. All right. Today's quote of the day, there's 2 of them. The first one, it would be remiss not to add this. I add this in every single presentation, every single training, every single class and course, etc., etc. Most prefer the certainty of misery to the misery of uncertainty, which means if you are miserable, and I say to you, Dwayne, since I see you in the chat here, if I say, Dwayne, behind door number 1 is completely unknown, but there's a 2% chance that you could be much happier, more fulfilled. Behind door number 2, you are guaranteeing the current life that you have, the current misery that you're in. Pragmatically, it makes a whole lot of sense to pick door number 1, because you're picking between a 2% chance of being happy and a 0% chance of being happy. In practice, most people over and over and over pick door 2, the devil they already know. So, and I'll talk about this later in the slides. If I say, hey, here's a better way of doing things, and here's a scientific orientation, meaning it's not guaranteed that things will be better tomorrow, but there's a higher probability that over time you get happier and happier and happier, most people still won't take it. They won't take it because they want guarantees. They want dogmatic responses, which we now know, hopefully, just continue the cycle of misery. All right? So being aware of it is just a very, very small part of the battle, because most people will still choose to be miserable rather than try to get better without knowing exactly what it's going to look like. And it is impossible to know exactly what it's going to look like. It cannot happen. People will make promises, and you will want that certainty, and they will fail to deliver, and you will again blame the authority or quote unquote leadership. That's the cycle that we've been talking about. Most prefer the certainty of misery to the misery of uncertainty. Okay. Now this is from Anna of Dopamine Nation. I don't know how to say her last name. I'm not going to try. Lessons of the balance. 1. The relentless pursuit of pleasure and avoidance of pain leads to pain. Seeking dopamine without effort will destroy a person. Seeking good news without work will lead to more bad news. You see how this all kind of comes together? All from different domains. I'm intentionally pulling from different domains with different types of people talking about different things to show that these patterns show up over and over and over in things that have rigor in their inference. What I mean by rigor in their inference is these are people that have studied this very, very rigorously under difficult circumstances or rigorous circumstances in order to get close to the truth. If there's no rigor in their inference, I have to discard it because scientific orientation. A dogmatic orientation is again, Republicans are bad because they think this. Like, well, have you laid out all of the logic, the reasoning, evidence on both sides and thought critically and spoken to people on both sides and gotten their opinions? If not, there's no rigor in that in your inference. You're just saying stuff. So intentionally, I've picked quotes from people that do have that rigor, right, from different domains. The reason we're also miserable may be because we're working so hard to avoid being miserable. Okay? Now, remember, this is not part of this quote. I'm layering in stuff we talked about before. We are working hard to avoid being miserable, but we are not working on ourselves. We are making signs and rioting outside. It's a lot of effort. Okay? We are working hard to look for good news. We're doing hours and hours of research trying to find things that confirm our bias. Okay? Dopamine Nation, by the way, is a great book. Great book. And we'll talk about what to do with it later. So, 6-word updates. There are some amazing ones here. Obviously, Jeff Moore's adding one to exceed day 1. We have not exceeded day 1 yet, but we'll see what happens. Stop looking for the magic pill. That's a great one. Technical solution authorities make poor leaders. That's a great one. Domesticate dogmatic thinking and technical approaches. I like this one because what Joey here understands. He's a student of ours. He's in the CCA program, so he has a deeper understanding. Is you cannot eliminate these things. You cannot eliminate dogmatic thinking. You cannot eliminate technical approaches. You cannot eliminate risk. You cannot eliminate guilt. You cannot eliminate shame. The idea that you can eliminate it in and of itself is dogmatic. You either have it or you don't. That is not how it works. What we want to do is domesticate it. We want to recognize when we are being dogmatic and then control it. So I really like this one, right? It's a very strong, if we say language is important, which was day 0, this is a very good example of a 6-word update. Obviously, again, he's a CCA student, so he's practiced this a lot, and we've had a lot of time together. But we want to domesticate these things. We do not eliminate them. If the language we use is eliminate, then we feel guilt and shame at a greater degree when we feel guilt and shame. Right? We got to have eliminated guilt and shame, and then we feel guilty, and then we're like, what? I thought I eliminated this, and then we spiral out of control. All we're doing is increasing the probability that you have more control over your dogmatic thinking and technical approaches over time. Remember the scientific orientation, it's probability and risk. It is not dogmatic. So by saying, if Joseph said, eliminate dogmatic thinking and technical approaches, that would be a dogmatic statement. We're talking about eliminating dogmatic thinking. So language is important. Words are important. Thinking critically about what is being said is important. That all goes back to day 0. Spend more time in the gray. Be a leader you would follow. Leadership equals focus on proper solutions, so on and so forth. So I strongly recommend you go read the rest of those. You might learn a thing or two. You might have some new questions. You can also dialogue. You can also jump on there and say, what do you mean by this? Tell me more. It's a very powerful tool. Not enough people are using it, in my opinion. Okay, so up to this point, week 0, our quote was, seeking dopamine without effort will destroy a person, Andrew Huberman. Beware the victim. Language is important. Technical or useful? When we're going about our life, do we really want to know what electricity is and how it works, or do you just want the action with the highest probability of turning it on? Do you really want to master the various theorems of aerodynamics, or do you want to learn how to ride a bike? We spoke about orientation toward being dogmatic and toward being scientific. Now, I actually have a new language, new intellectual property around this that was shared, we talked about yesterday. I'll share that later on. But this language, credit Dr. Trevor Kashey, one of the smartest humans I know. I strongly recommend you just consume his stuff. In week 1, we talked about, instead of looking for saviors with good news, we should be looking for calling for leadership that will challenge us and face our own problems. Yep. We have to do work. We should not seek good news. We should do work. Engineer good news. Make good news. If you're not willing to make good news, I don't know that you have a right to sit around and expect it. That's my personal opinion. You are welcome to have your own. Why we rebel against and supposed to be repel good leaders. And then we explored Bill, William Ruckelshaus, and the 2 tyrants of leadership, scrutiny and expectation. Day 2, despise the free lunch was the quote. We talked about adaptive problems versus technical problems. Now, you can go back and watch these if they're still available. If not, I list them and unlist them just kind of randomly, so just pay attention if you got to get caught up. We talked about adaptive problems versus technical problems, and that's what we dove into yesterday. Today, I'm going to layer on to technical and adaptive problems. I'm going to do my best to explain this. I should have, in person, I'll typically I'll draw it out and make all these graphics and make sure that people understand what is being said. Because language is important. What is being said versus what is being heard, versus what is implied versus what is asked versus what is responded to. It's all very important. It's very difficult to do in a presentation style. But I'll do my best here. Okay. Adaptive versus technical problems. Technical problems are typically problems of detail complexity. Detail complexity, expertise, that they're nuanced, they're detailed, right? You have to look under a microscope. If you look under a microscope, only a trained oncologist is going to see certain things that somebody that is not trained or has not mastered oncology, right? Cancer. That's a detail thing. How much of a dose do you need medicine-wise? What is the proper dose? What are the blood levels? What does the blood work look like? These are problems of detail complexity. Headlines. If you're writing a sales copy, funnels, what color are the buttons? These are, why is my conversion rate so low? These are problems of detail complexity. It's the details that the experts and the technicians have been trained in. They have, in theory, mastered the detail complexity. Okay? Adaptive problems are typically problems of dynamic complexity. That's an entirely different thing. So when we talk about complexities, is it detail complexity or is it dynamic complexity? Detail complexity is like something really high fact finders are going to be really good at. High fact finders are going to be poor, typically, at dynamic complexity. Because dynamic complexity, I'm not going to talk about the technical one, that's easy. There's a misunderstanding of feedback loops. The reason we have a hard time with the feedback loops with the dynamic complexity is the consequences happen somewhere else in space and time, and it's assumed to be a byproduct of a technical problem. So people look at the details when they should be looking at the dynamics. I will explain what that means, and then we'll get to what all this means. Okay, these are just things that would be remiss not to cover. Imagine you have let me think of a best example. You have a 6-year-old daughter. Okay, it's kind of an extreme example, but I mean, it's not an extreme example. It happens all the time. But people don't like this example because it's not. It hits some of them pretty hard. 6-year-old daughter. Seemingly irrelevant at this point, because what we're really worried about is you want your bikini body back. You want your bikini body back, and you want it by summer, which is 3 months away. And if you don't have your bikini body back by summer, you know, what is the point? Everything sucks. There's the dogmatic thinking right there. Now, I'm guessing you don't have a trend. You haven't been tracking your calories for the last year, or your weight, or your activity, so you have no trend. Already, whatever diet or whatever method you choose is arbitrary. There's no trend line in which to suggest where the best starting point is. So now we have an arbitrary goal, bikini body, 30 pounds. Let's say I got to lose 30 pounds. We have an arbitrary goal, an arbitrary timeline, an arbitrary starting point. All those things have no data to support them as being feasible, which makes it non-scientific because there's no data, there's no real hypothesis. There's just an expectation of a specific outcome. I need to weigh 30 pounds less on this date. You can see the dogmatic orientation, right? Let me know in the chat. That's what happens. We do this all the time, not just with fitness. We do this in our business. We do this everywhere, in our relationships. I have no data, but now I have this goal, and I'm hell-bent on this goal, and the only acceptable outcome is this. I have no data that suggests this is a reasonable outcome for me. If somebody else did it, that has nothing to do with me. I'm a completely separate organism in a completely separate set of circumstances. So this is how a dogmatic process works. No variables controlled, no data, no trend line, completely arbitrary starting point, ending point, and expected outcome. And if we don't get that expected outcome, we're going to be disappointed, which means we set ourselves up for disappointment, right? So that's why I wanted to introduce dogmatic thinking and all that in the beginning. Okay. So we are already coming from a place of a dogmatic orientation. And what happens is when you have a dogmatic orientation, reality does not match your expectations. It does not match your expectations. It can't. You gave it about a 0 probability because you have 1 or 2 acceptable expectations and a process that is entirely arbitrary. It just made up from some stuff you saw somewhere, and there's no rigor in the inference. So what happens is you start. Now you're eating different. Maybe you're saying no to meals. Maybe you're skipping carbs, whatever you're doing. And it's stressful. You might binge eat sometimes, right? Because you believe that you've been working really hard for 6 days, and then you justify, I can eat whatever I want. You're looking in the mirror a lot. You're really weird about your body. It's a focus of everything that you do. Okay? And then you're on track sometimes, and you celebrate because I'm on track. And you it's great. You're happy about it. And then other days, your weight goes up a little bit because you're bloated or inflamed or whatever, and it's like a doom loop. You're upset. You don't understand all this for nothing. You reach your goal, or you don't. You lose 30 pounds in the time frame, or you don't. If you do, you probably act because you have no plan after that. You probably gain the weight, and you probably go on. Most likely scenario is you start the cycle of yo-yo dieting that a lot of people struggle with today. Or you don't, and you have a meltdown, and you act and say things that are extreme, dogmatic, focused on your body and your weight. All right? There might be some strife in your relationship. They might be supportive. I don't know. But what I do know is that your behavior has changed drastically. And you probably haven't communicated it very well with everybody that matters. All right? So what does this have to do with dynamic complexity? Well, yo-yo diet, maybe you fix your relationship with food, maybe you don't. Maybe you fix your relationship with your body, maybe you don't. Maybe you work on it and you get halfway there. It doesn't matter because you broke your relationship with your body and food, or you made it worse. And it was apparent to the people around you, including that 6-year-old girl that was sitting around in the house with you, watching you act that way. So 12 years later, well, let's call it 10 years later, you have a 16-year-old girl who has an unhealthy relationship with her body and food. And you don't understand. So what do? You blame media. You blame the magazines. You blame her friends. You can't believe what society's come to. All of these fake influencers using filters make my daughter feel this way. Maybe some of that is true. But this is most likely a consequence of the cycle that you started 10 years ago. But because it is manifesting somewhere else in space and time, we don't have that feedback loop. And you know how many times we are doing this? It's easy from the outside looking in. It's really hard to catch on your own. When we are blaming something, and because we have an orientation to think everything's a technical problem, we're looking for the technical solution. What is the flip that I can switch? Who can I be mad at? Who can I blame for this thing happening right now? But it is not a byproduct entirely of what is happening right now. Make sense? This happens in business all of the time. This happens in personal life all of the time. It happens in investing all of the time. Who can I blame? What can I fix? Yada, yada, yada. Well, it's not a technical problem. This is a dynamic problem. So we have to look at somewhere else in space and time. And that's very hard to do. And we can't undo it. So all we can do is try to do better moving forward. And that's tough. We want to think that there's a flip we can switch. You don't tell me it's too late. And what I have to do is work on myself. That's absurd. Just give me the pill. Show me the switch. Ban all these channels with women's bodies on it because it makes my daughter dislike herself. Well, the reality is, if we're scientific thinkers and we're thinking about probability, because there is no sure thing, had you developed a healthy relationship with your weight and your body and food when she was the ages of 6 to 18, it'd be a much higher probability that even if these outside influences now are impacting her, they wouldn't be. They wouldn't be, right? So this is a dynamic complexity. They happen again. They happen everywhere. So dynamic complexities, one more time, misunderstood the feedback loops because the consequences are happening somewhere else in space and time. And because it's somewhere else in space and time, we have a very hard time drawing it back to anything other than immediate technical problem. Right? Hope that makes sense. So, and there's much deeper dives into this than I've done before. I've done it in business, fitness, medicine. I've crypto. I haven't done it in crypto yet, but I will. I'll tie in the technical component of it, or the domain. But we need to understand. So now we're going to layer on these technical. First of all, we have to be able to identify technical versus adaptive problems. If we can't do that, nothing else really matters. We're just going to keep trying to fix things that can't be fixed, and we're going to ignore the important things, and we're going to blame other people, specifically authorities, for all of our problems, and we're never going to modify our own behavior. When we don't modify our own behavior, things do not get better, they get worse, but we compound that by having a whole bunch of impressionable small humans that are watching, and it doesn't matter what we say. If you say you should love your body, but then you go and you hate your body, kids are not stupid. We insult the intelligence of other adults and children way too often, in my opinion. Kids are not stupid. They watch how you behave. They listen far less to what you say, and they watch how you behave. But that's also true for spouses and employees and vendors and business partners and investors. Okay? So we have this dynamic complexity, and then we have this deal with adaptive technical problems, which is tough. And then we have a whole nother issue that we have to process, which is leadership versus authority. Leadership is going to tell you, hey, look, I'm sorry. It is very likely that you having this unhealthy relationship with your body for the last 10 years and having this girl in the house watching you struggle with this has led to a lot of these problems. Right? Authority without good leadership is going to say, yeah, I can ban all those channels with girls in bikinis and also find them, and here's a therapist. And hopefully the therapist can handle an adaptive problem. More than likely, a therapist is not going to be willing to deal with an adaptive problem for all the reasons we talked about before. So you see this, it's just this ongoing loop. And I am here to do my best to break it. And when I say break it, I mean have the highest probability of helping as many people start to break this cycle as possible over time. It's a scientific orientation. That's the game. So what can we do? And today's going to be a short one. What can we do? First, we must recognize when we are being dogmatic and tap into a scientific orientation. I'll give you some other ways of thinking about it. Daniel Kahneman wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, System 1, System 2. Okay? Scientific dogmatic. Now, just because you're thoughtful doesn't mean you're not being dogmatic. So you have to, even the System 2 can lead you down the wrong road. Dr. Jeff Spencer, one of my greatest friends and biggest influences on me, I think most of you know that, has the human versus the champion mind. The human mindset, what you are hardwired to do is be very dogmatic. The champion's mind you have to say, whoa, I'm coming from the human mind. A champion is going to come from a scientific orientation, which we are going to call adaptive fitness, which means we got to start thinking and speaking and processing and planning based on probability, risk, and an acceptance of an infinite number of possible outcomes. There could be 2 or 3 outcomes that are not acceptable. You would still have an infinite number of acceptable outcomes. It's much better to be dogmatic about your non-negotiables than your must-haves. That's what in bumpers. That's what we're talking about in bumpers. Okay. Second, we have to be aware that there is a difference. We must distinguish between leadership and authority. Leadership being holding up a mirror and saying, this is you, this is how you're contributing, and also this is how I'm contributing, and we got to figure this out together. And authority, which is just the person you look to for answers. Authorities can be leaders can be authorities. Oftentimes, the best leaders are not formal authorities because they're not constrained by re-elections, voting, positions on the board, stuff like that. So Gandhi, Martin Luther King, people like that, they were not appointed leaders, or they were not appointed a position of authority before they demonstrated leadership. That said, it's proof that you do not need a position of authority. In fact, when you have a position of authority, you do become handcuffed. You have more eyeballs, you have more attention, and you have more authority. But you also have a new set of constraints, rules, regulations, stuff like that. We just have to be aware of this. What you do with it, entirely up to you, based on what you want. And we have to understand the distinction between technical and adaptive problems. Technical and adaptive problems. Go to yesterday for that if you want it. And we need to practice identifying them, the distinction between all of these things, by using your brain. We got to use our brains. Now here's the trick. In order to accomplish this, I'm not saying you have to do this, I'm saying in order to accomplish this, then you must use your brain to fight your biases, to fight your dogmatic thinking. Because even if you have a lot of brain power, a really smart person, if they're not aware of these things, they can use all that cognitive horsepower to validate their biases, to justify their biases. That's the problem with smart people, is we assume they're smart, they're going to make good decisions, but they can actually be smart enough to make really strong arguments to themselves and others for things that aren't helpful. So we're going to slow down, allow for space, reflect, and respond thoughtfully. So before we go out and picket, we go out with signs, stand on the White House lawn and demand things get better. Maybe that is a solution, but let's slow down first. Allow for space. Let's think about, is this a technical problem? Can this person even help? Or are we just looking for somebody to blame? How can we help this person help? How can we contribute to them making a decision? And if you're not willing to do that, then you don't want things to get better. That's okay. Just admit it. I don't want things to get better. I just want to blow off some steam. Okay, I don't think that's helpful, but as long as you know what you're doing, I don't think anybody can judge you. As long as you know what you're doing, you have a right to do whatever you want within ethical, legal boundaries. However, you do not have a right to demand something if you are acting in diametric opposition to it. My opinion, but stating it like a fact because it's my channel. Okay? So you need to align your espoused values and beliefs with your values in action. This is really what my book Bumpers is about. That means if we say we want a better future for our children, stop arguing with adults on the internet and spend time with your children. We need to align, or this is hard for people, and it's probably true for some. You're saying, I want a better future for my children. You're arguing with adults. What you actually want is for other adults to think you're smart. So just say that. You can change your espoused values. You don't have to change your behavior to match your words. You could change your words to match your behavior. What is important is that they are aligned so that you have a right to act in the way that you're acting. Hope that makes sense. And come up with your own operating system. Over the last 4 days, hopefully there's been some new information and insight. Some loops opened. Now, we have to update our operating system. Most people just read about stuff or learn about stuff and they don't update their operating system. They don't actually download the program. Figure out don't just blindly adopt mine. I'm a weird dude. You don't have to act like me or think like me or anything. I just hope that I can give this to you and you can say, okay, so what do I want my operating system to be now that I know this? What do I really want? Do I really want the world to be better? Do I really want it to be better for posterity? Maybe you're 50 years old and you don't have kids and you don't give a shit about posterity. Cool. Update your operating system to be aligned with that. No judgment, as long as there's alignment. On my end, anyway. All right, so I'll tell you what I'm doing about it. This is based on very heavy on my experience and my past and what I like and believe. So you can model this. You do not adopt it blindly. In the short term, I am doing this. All of my companies are focused on, you notice we don't talk a lot about tactical stuff if you're in the CCA, if you've ever been in the network. But in my companies, I'm not talking about, I don't deal with technical problems. I think they are so, and not to be dismissive or whatever, for the way my brain works and what my interests are, technical problems are so low leverage. They just don't really move the needle that much generally. Solving a technical problem could make a huge difference. It could. Figuring out how to get Elon's rocket to work could have a dynamic complexity of putting people on Mars. That's great. It could change the world. But by and large, fixing broken adults. We're all broken. And that's okay. Something about imperfections being perfections. So this is what I do in the short term. Try to help adults, full-grown adults, think differently. I never try to tell them how to think or anything like that. This long-term, our long-term mission, our what we're doing in both inside the Wolf Den and inside Searching to You with the Success Finder, there's always this underpinning or ongoing focus on posterity, building strong children, because I don't see another path forward that makes any sense. We look at the loop, we look at the reality of what it really is, and we can always make our lives a little bit better over time. I do not personally really see a legitimate solution outside of posterity, and it's going to maybe take generations and generations and generations. Some people aren't interested in changing 5 generations from now. A lot of people think we won't even be around that long, and that's okay. even if I did believe that, I have to find something to do with my time. And it's important to me to do something useful. I have a utilitarian philosophy. Generally speaking, I tend to orient towards whatever I believe is best for the system as a whole. Sometimes that benefits me. Sometimes it costs me and everybody else benefits. But by and large, it all comes out in the wash. So I'm just sharing my perspective and where I come from. If you come from a different place, you're going to come to a different solution. But this is what I'm doing. Short term, I show up for adults when appropriate and when I feel like there's something that might be useful. Long term, focus on posterity. Now, the hope is a whole bunch of you that are parents or aunties or uncles or school teachers are updating your operating system the way you think is appropriate and like via osmosis, if not direct teaching, passing it on to posterity. This is how we get better over time. Does it fix your situation right now? No. But much of your situation right now is from 20 or 30 or 40 years of behavior. So it might take a couple years to undo it. And I think that's fair. I think it is fair to realize you spent 30 years walking in the wrong direction and allow for some time to get back on track. The idea that you're going to not pay attention to anything for 30 years and then in 6 weeks you're going to have the dream life is ridiculous. Give yourself time. You have permission. It's appropriate. If it took you 30 years to dig a hole and you can get out of it in 2, you are winning. You're winning. I know it doesn't feel like it. Okay? So the goal for me is to have less adults in the future that have dug themselves holes. They dig smaller holes. They get out of it faster. It's all relative. It's just an ongoing relative improvement over time. This is a amazing thing that humans do. It's the dogmatic thinking where it's like, you know what? I'm ready to make money now. And you just think it's going to come in 6 months after 20 years of not being able to do it. Give yourself time and set up the future to be in a little bit better position. And if you can do that, they'll set up their children, their future to be a little bit better position, so on and so forth. Cool. Now, what I'm not doing is out picketing outside of, in Washington, rioting about changing the education system. Why? Because it's dogmatic and it's not actually going to do anything. It's not actually going to do anything. So I'm choosing to do the things that I believe will help a few people at a time. Because, if I could learn how to use slides, if language is important, see all these ifs, this assumes that we have aligned on the previous conversations. If language is important, if you don't think language is important, you're going to come to a different conclusion. If scientific thinking is more effective than dogmatic thinking, if adaptive problems are different than technical problems, and if authority and leadership are distinct from one another, they're not exactly the same thing. Again, these are ifs. And this is my belief. Building strong children is easier and more fun than fixing broken adults. To me, the path forward is clear. Day to day, I don't know what that means, but it's all about having an orientation to figure things out. Now, you may come up with a completely different idea. I'm showing you how I got here and the thought process that I go through, and just observation of if I believed there was a switch, even if it was a very low probability, if I believed there was a switch, or if we just elected the right person, everything would get better, I would go that route. I do not believe that for all the reasons I just shared for the last couple of days. Now you can, that's a macro level. On a micro level, you can look at your business, you can look at your life, you can look at your portfolio, you can look at your relationships with your spouse, with your family, with your children, and you can run through the same stuff and say, okay, so what is the path? The path is probably demonstrate better leadership and help people understand what's going on and help people understand a lot of the things that maybe you took away from here. So what I recommend you do, your journal, hit your 6-word update. I want to see some good ones today. You've been shown, as per usual, glimpses of a mirror. So this is how humans act. Now, some of you probably go, oh crap, I do that. That means you just got a glimpse of a mirror. Just held up a little bit of a mirror to you. You got to be aware of how you responded to that. Right? Just because you know about all this stuff doesn't mean it didn't suck to have a mirror held up. You go, crap, I do that. I know, probably didn't want to hear it. I'm pretty sure a whole bunch of people that watched the first couple days aren't showing up for day 3 because they don't want to hear it. This is not good news. This is not 3 steps to getting rich. Well, no shit. Wouldn't make any sense to have 3 steps to getting rich. And you have become aware, hopefully, of a new set of concepts. Maybe the same concepts articulated a different way, or you have just remembered something that you already knew before. Those are all equally valuable. Now, being aware doesn't mean anything. Something called the G.I. Joe bias. Being aware of your bias does not mean you are not prone to that bias. So a lot of times, we will have people that truly believe. They will preach the Good Samaritan because they truly believe you should love thy neighbor no matter what. And they will also step over homeless people and treat their waitress like shit. Just because they are aware of the Good Samaritan and they know that it's a good idea and they want to espouse it and believe that they believe it, they still treat other people like shit. It's not what are you going to say. There's no test, right? It's not how can you test and get it right. The question is, what are you going to do or who are you going to be? What are you going to do, who are you going to be? Not what do you think you would like to be, or not what do you think you would look like in a perfect world. I don't care about any of that stuff. You are who you are today, and you do what you do today. How are you going to modify that just a tiny bit tomorrow, or the next day, or whenever? Maybe not at all. And if that's the case, be honest about it. Align your words with your actions. Because when you align your words with your actions, you then have a feedback loop that is relatively high efficacy. Okay? So if you say, I treat people well, why will nobody help me out in a time of crisis? That's confusing. Okay? The feedback loop doesn't make any sense. But if you believe you treat people well, you actually treat them like shit, then that feedback, that makes a whole lot of sense why nobody comes to your aid in crisis, right? So until you can align what you believe and say about yourself with your actual behavior, you can't make sense of the outcome. Scientific thinking, you can't isolate variables. Like if I mixed sodium and chloride and I didn't get salt. This is weird. Well, if you actually mixed two other random chemicals, no shit you didn't get salt. Right? So what you say and what you believe you have done needs to align with what you have actually done. Otherwise, there is no way to adjust. You have no control. You are right back into that haphazard behavior with dogmatic expectations. We want a controlled behavior, at least an honest behavior, aligned behavior with whatever outcome happens, and then we can improve. Hope that makes sense. Next, right? Wrap up with that. I'll probably do day 4 coming up sometime by the end of the month, maybe in the beginning, because we have something really cool coming out at the end of the month that I want to share. CCA enrollment for CCA 4 opens today. It's halfway full. I think there's a link in the bio. Not going to hard sell. I don't really sell anything. The focus can be really heavy on the wolf den and Certain to You. Might do some videos. Might do a series of videos here live on YouTube. It really just depends on how the schedule works out and whether or not people actually want to. I don't think a lot of people really want to hear about how they need to modify their own behavior. And that I get it. I understand. It's typically why we only work with individuals that are at a certain level, that are paying a certain amount of money, because it's just not a mass market thing. Most people just don't really want things to get better for themselves. They say they do, but once they know what the work, they don't really want to. Links will be posted in channels. It's probably in this description. I don't remember what links I put in this description. But let's just go back to the homework. What are you going to do? Write about it, journal about it, think about it. All right? I'm looking forward to the 6-word updates. Let's get a whole bunch of them. Engage with each other, 6-word updates, help each other, learn from each other. Wisdom comes from multiple perspectives. I got that from Jeff Moore, and he got that from someone else like 10 years ago. And that's it. So appreciate you guys, and hope it was helpful. Nicsmas in July. That's a wrap.